Good evening and welcome to the school committee meeting February 5th, 2020. I'd like to remind everybody this meeting is being broadcast live. It is also being recorded for use at a further time if needed, so please keep that in mind. We're going to be having a budget hearing tonight. The superintendent will be presenting the budget with John and
George.
And the superintendent. Jeff.
We're here.
So that's what we'll be doing. But I'd ask everybody to please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Also, would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. I'd entertain a motion to open the public hearing for the budget, for the school budget.
Second.
Roll call.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, meeting is open. We're going to hear from, as I said, the superintendent and Mr. Tuffy and Mr. Farrow.
Thank you, Bob. As we move forward into this presentation, I'd just first like to thank everyone who's been involved in this budget process. And I feel like this budget process doesn't begin today. It actually began sometime in August of 2019. There's been quite a bit of conversation, dialogue, emotion about the school budget and the method of assessment. Many people worked publicly and behind the scenes to put together this presentation here using the statutory method. And I know people on both sides in the community, FinCom, select folks, boards of selectmen, town administrators have already had dialogue on how to make this budget work for the students of Whitman-Hanson. And I still hold true to the students of Whitman-Hanson. As we proceed through this presentation, you have two documents. You have a PowerPoint document that we'll walk through, and then you have a assessment worksheet that Mr. Tuffy will go through. This isn't the only piece of information that will be available to the community and the board and the school committee. We are currently working on some feedback from last year, meaning a history of our line items. We're actually inputting 2021 now. We have 19 and 20 ready to go, so that document will be available. And I ask people to be patient. The numbers from the governor came out 2 weeks ago today. John is still, as I remind folks, part-time. Our folks in our central office have been working very diligently to make sure the numbers are accurate that we present. And we didn't want to present too many pieces of paper so people would get lost in paperwork. What we really wanted to present was the here and now, what we're looking for, and what we are looking to go in the next few years. Taking feedback from last year and from years past, I took a recommendation from Mr. Tuffy in the way he used to present his budgets at Silver Lake, and it seems to work for us right now. So you will see a required assessment and number through this, and a recommended number. The recommended number includes everything that we are looking for as a regional school district now and in the next 5 years. The required piece of that is really what we're looking to do, level service. And traditionally, the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District has presented a level service budget, I will also go through the fact that last year we made cuts, and I will show those cuts as far as staff. So we went below level service last year in what we were looking for. So page one, if you want to flip to page one after the cover sheet, our total required number of an increase is 2.592200, or a 4.94% increase in the overall budget. And let me just stop right there. Using the statutory method, we're going to give you a budget number with an increase of the overall district budget. Gone are the days of the worksheet of, this is the increase we want, 5.8%, and this is a 1% increase, this is a 2% increase, this is on that sheet. We don't do that sheet anymore with the statutory method, okay? That was the agreement method, this is the statutory. So we are looking for level service for 2021, a 4.94% increase in the budget. Our recommended items is 2.475000, or an additional 4.72% increase in the budget. Meaning an overall total, if I could win the lottery for the children of Whitman-Hanson this year, we'd be looking for a $5,5067,200 overall increase in our budget, or 9.66%. Flip the next page. This breaks this down clearer for folks, is what is required and what is recommended. I'd like the folks out there to know, we as a regional school district, in our required, have to pay utilities and things like that, that other district departments or other district entities don't necessarily have to budget for in their budget. The town covers. Electricity, heat, things like that. So line number one, our increased salary line is 2.58% for every, or it's our average for all our employees. Contracted, union folks, teachers, paras, central office administrators, anyone that has a contract here on our salary is 2.58%, or a total cost of $1.352200. Next in line is our PCA pension, which is required, of $107,000. Health insurance is up 4%, or $200,000. Regular transportation by contract is up $42,000. SJ contracted services, $29,000. Our gas and electric will go up approximately $83,000. Our water bill, $30,000. Trash is up $8,000. Special education transportation, we are raising that to make it level service because we're over budget now. We're asking for $275,000. Special education tuition, we are looking to increase that line to make it level service because we're over there right now at $110,000. Our facilities, gentlemen, are working on certifications which make us more efficient, so we don't have to send our vehicles out and some of our things out to be serviced. They're gaining certifications, so we'd like to pay them for that. We are looking to make level service our ELL. I'd like to add an ELL teacher at 0.5 at $30,000. Right now, our ELL population is growing, and we need to make sure that they are serviced correctly. These next four items were in the original presentation of Restore. These next four items that were cut or eliminated from last year's budget, but after conversations with our leadership team, I feel they need to be required. We lost a person in a leadership role in technology, and that position has broken into what we feel a technology specialist, more boots on the ground and in the field, and an operations facilitator to make sure tickets are gone out and we can appropriate things more efficiently to our workers. We are adding an ELA language-based or English curriculum K-5 at $145,000. Currently, we don't have an ELA curriculum. Last year, as you know, we added a math curriculum for our elementary students. We need to add the ELA curriculum. And then for our middle school students, part of the curriculum we added last year, we need to add a math diagnostic. That, I feel, are required services. It's a little more than level service, but again, I go to those four pieces that we add for Restore. should be required for the kids of Whitman-Hanson, for a total of $2.592,200. Moving on down to recommended. We brainstormed, we've heard from townsfolk, we've heard from school committee, we've heard from kids, and we've heard from school committee. We'd like to add over time, again this year if possible, a robotics program and coding program, K-8, approximately $25,000. We talked about our Bright program, which is the middle, in the high school right now, we have a transition room for students who go out on either medical or mental health issues for more than 5 days. They transition through our Bright program, which is staffed by an adjustment counselor and a paraprofessional. We'd like to add these two to the middle school based upon our pillar or our hallmark of social emotional needs. Our middle school students are struggling just like our high school students, and it's very challenging for a sixth grader to have a mental health issue and then go right back to class when they come back from a hospitalization. That's in the recommended area. Special ed PD and supplies at $40,000. Right now, we are providing as much PD as we can for our special educators. As I've discussed before, the students in front of them are different than the students we had 15 years ago. They're coming in with more trauma and more specific special needs. We'd like to provide our people PD internally or externally so that we can then maybe keep kids in district for a longer period of time. We've talked about this since I came here in 2010. Full-day kindergarten, we're guesstimating it's $800,000. Adjusting our school start times, we've talked about moving the high school to a later time, making the middle schools equal and all three elementary schools equal at a start time. That's approximately $440,000 for the first year. Staffing, as we all know, we cut middle school foreign language. We only had 2 teachers, 1 per building at the middle school. If we want to do middle school language correctly and appropriately, we'd have to add at least 10 teachers. That includes language teachers, foreign language teachers, and reading specialists to help those students who aren't going to be taking foreign language, to the tune of about $700,000. And then we'd like to bring back, if possible, the 4 teachers that we lost last year, and reduce the class sizes specifically at Duval School, Indian Head, and the high school at a tune of $280,000. So the recommended total is looking at $2.475000. The next page is basically just a summary of what our budget was, what we closed at last year. FY 2020 was $52,425,738. Our preliminary budget with everything is $57,492,938, again, with an increase of 9.66% or $5,067,200. The next page is just a diagram to show where our expenses are and what our salary lines are. So 52% of our budget of $57,492,938 is in salary, and our expenses, 48% of our budget. That includes transportation. That includes $5 million plus in underfunded and unfunded mandates. Those are our utility costs. That's Plymouth County retirement. That's health and building insurance, because we have to insure the buildings as well as the health insurance for teachers, and that's curriculum. Those are just examples of our expenses. Just a snapshot of our enrollment from 2015 to today and projected for next year. We're on a decrease. Decrease in enrollment means decrease potentially in state aid, and we are fighting that battle of losing kids. I don't think kids are necessarily going out as much. There are, when we talk budget and we talk cuts, we lose kids to vocational schools, we lose kids to charter schools, we lose kids to charter schools because of full day K, and we lose kids to to choice because of full day K. We've talked about that before, and I'll keep reiterating that, but we are losing students. Also, families aren't having 5 or more kids anymore. Next page is staffing for this year. Just to reiterate what we did cut. We cut 9.2 teachers. We cut 6 paraprofessionals. We reduced our out-of-district coordinator. We cut 3 aides. We cut 1 central office person. We cut our tech director. We cut our facilities and building use person, or a total of 22.2 staff positions. We did add 3 elementary adjustment counselors as one of our goals for last year. So a net cost cut of 19.2 positions. What I didn't highlight is that we took $590,000 from E&D last year, and we also cut $292,000 worth of supplies before we got to that budget. This next page is another pie chart of where monies are go and what we have. We're looking at assessments at 51.03% of our budget. Grants make up 2.37% of our budget. Local receipts are 0.27% of our budget. Our net state aid is 45.52% of our budget. And circuit breaker, which is special education reimbursement, is 0.81% of our budget. Outstanding issues that we have currently. Right now, we have to guesstimate our retirements for FY21. By contracts, teachers can notify us of retirements by March 1st. However, today's February, as we move forward with the budget. There are packages in the teacher's contract as far as sick leave buyback, so we have to guesstimate who might retire and what their buyback might be. State aid is always an issue. We have to rely on the governor's budget for quite a bit of our money from the state. Special education is a fluctuating cost. I believe our current Director of Pupil Services has a very good handle on it and is looking to improve and make sure we modify our out-of-district placements and try to bring kids back. We know our out-of-district placements and our transportation costs are challenging. I will tell the committee and I will tell the community, we just went through a thorough audit from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education that we asked for on our special education transportation. We will present that information. They said they'd give us 6 to 8 weeks before they bring back a report. The numbers look good, that we are efficient, but I'd like to share that with you once we get the formal audit. Our enrollment is declining. Health and building insurance fluctuates year to year. And then as we go forward with our overall budget review, we need to have an understanding of where the two towns are at. Okay? This is a document that you've seen before. We kind of narrowed it down to our local communities right next door to us. The 2018 data from DESE says we are spending $12,740 per pupil. Abington currently is spending $13,461 per pupil. Rockland is spending $15,568 per pupil, and the state average, just for a number, is $15,952. We're still low. We're not fifth from the bottom anymore. At that count, we're 19th from the bottom, according to 2018 records. I believe this last page is the page everybody's been waiting to see, what it means. What's the 2021 assessment? So if you go down to required, the operating assessment for Hanson, I'm looking for a number of 11,903,983. Non-mandated busing at 200,345. Their capital technology HVAC payment is 141,080, and capital for the high school is 292,252. Over to Whitman, the operating assessment is 14,974,512. Non-mandated busing is 300,016. Capital is 437,648. Under recommended, Hanson assessment, operating 12,894,973. Non-mandated busing, capital and capital tech and capital high school, the same. Whitman operating under recommended is 16,458,522 with the same numbers for non-mandated busing and capital. I'm going to turn it over to John to go through the assessment worksheet so that folks in the gallery can see how this is different than our past budget presentations and how the numbers are formed. Good?
My turn, huh?
Your turn. You're on.
Just a couple things before we start. When you look at the assessments, the last page that the superintendent talked about, where it says high school capital, just to be clear, that's debt service. It's not a particular capital project that's ongoing. That's debt service that's there every year. And where it says capital technology, HVAC, that's for Hanson only, and that's an ongoing project of technology that's, we're just coming to the end of debt service that went with it. and some air conditioning units that were put in 2 schools last year. I'll try to use my town meeting voice, but I don't know if that'll work. I'll do my best. So, how about if I just move up and
Go
so I'm
ahead.
facing the audience? Is that all right? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Is that any better? Can you hear me in the back? Okay, we'll try this. What I started by saying is if you looked at the last page that said assessments that the superintendent went over, I just wanted to be clear. When it says Capital High School, that refers to debt service. It's something that you've been paying on this building for some time, and it's got a few more years left to go, but it's not a new program of any kind. And when we talk about capital technology, HVAC in Hanson, it's Hanson only. It deals with investment in technology a few years ago that is coming to an end, as a matter of fact. We'll be paying that off. But there were some air conditioning units, I understand, that were put in a couple of the buildings last year, and that's replacing really that cost. So that's what that is. This is the packet that deals with assessments, and I'm going to ask you to look at the last page first, because we're going to go through a couple of pages that are the resources that go into the numbers that you see, and I just want you to know where they come from. This page, very quickly, is from the Department of Education, and it tells you a couple of things. It tells you, and under number 1, which is on the left-hand side, that this year you got $24,776,000 in state aid. It tells you that your foundation budget for next year, so when it talks about prior year, it's this year now. And when it talks about next year, it's fiscal year 21. It says foundation budget is $40,719,000. That is a number that the state computes for all schools. It has to do with your students and how many you have and what their ages are. State acknowledges it costs more to educate a high school student than a kindergartner, that an elementary school student costs less than a middle school student. So it comes up with a number that they say provides an adequate education. Understand that we are also required to provide a number of services that are not in that. Things like debt service for this building and capital projects do not count towards that foundation budget, nor does transportation, which we're required to provide. So that's not included. It's not an all-in number, if you will. But nonetheless, they say the foundation budget is $40 million. Our required contribution would be $20,400,000. That's number 3 if you're following along. And your foundation aid for that, and foundation aid is based on the state's feeling of your ability to pay, is $20 million. So when you look at the increase between foundation aid for next year and what we're getting this year, it's 0, because you're getting more aid than the $20 million. You're getting $24 million. Every year for probably a decade, the state has come up with something called minimum aid. It's per pupil. We've gotten that every year. It's about $100,000 that we get. It increases our state aid on Chapter 74 program by about 0.4%. And until we get to the point where our foundation budget is equal to the Chapter 70 aid that we get, that's all we're going to get. So it's unlikely you're going to see an increase in state aid in Chapter 70 for some time. And if we look back at what's happened, that's been our experience. The other number I want to point out is required district contribution. If you look on the right-hand side of the page in the comparisons to FY20, it starts with enrollment, goes down to foundation budget, it goes to required district contribution, and then it gets to Chapter 78. So the district contribution is the number that you saw on the other side, and that's the number we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. The next page takes that, we use this for 2 reasons. this is the enrollment numbers that we're working with. So we're working with an enrollment of 3,644 students. And so when we say what's the proportion between Whitman and Hanson, well, Hanson has 1,467 students, or 40.04%. And Whitman is 59.96. People talk about 60-40. Gosh, that's awfully close. The other thing that is important is if we're looking at the right-hand side of the page, the third column in talks about minimum contribution. It says Whitman's minimum contribution is $9,328,000.
That's it.
Hanson.
Hanson's, thank you. And Whitman's is $11,117,000. Those are numbers that are used in the assessment formula. I want you to know where they came from. They come from the Department of Education. And then finally, you have a sheet of paper that says DLS in the upper left-hand corner, and that's our cherry sheet. That's the money we get from the state. And Jeff used a term before, net state aid, because as we all know, the state gives and the state takes away. The state gives us Chapter 74, and it gives us transportation aid. It gives us some reimbursement for charter school students. It gives us some reimbursement for school choice students. On the other hand, there are some estimated charges that go with SPED students, school charter, and school tuition. And so we net those all together. That comes out to $25,200,000, an increase overall of $93,000 year over year. Not a lot more money coming from the state. So those are the numbers that go into the assessment sheet. So the statutory method that we've talked about is in the law, in the ed reform law. And some time ago, the Department of Education actually sent out an information sheet about how to compute it. And so as we go through this, you're going to see step 1, step 2, step 3, and that all refers to the guidance that was issued by the Department of Education. We start on the very first page. It says 1 of 1 with the proposed budget. It's $55,017,000. To get to an assessment, we take out transportation, we take out high school debt service, and we take out the 2 projects in Hanson. The reason for that has to do with just a test that says, are we meeting net minimum spending? You're doing it without a problem, but we will be adding those expenses back in. So when we take those numbers out, we're starting with a budget of $52,357,000. Next page, and it's number 3, it says budget. That just carries over from the previous page. We're going to take some things out of that, common revenues. Interest income, about $50,000. We get some reimbursements from Medicaid for some services we provide. That's $100,000. We get circuit breaker aid. That's $450,000. You see proposed cherry sheet numbers. Those cherry sheets can change. In fact, we expect there'll be some changes. The governor has a budget that he presents. The House usually looks at it and makes some recommendations. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. The Senate will then look at it. They'll jump in and make their decisions. And finally, we get a conference committee that gives us a final budget. But these are the best numbers we have right now. We're going to get some aid, $319,000 in school choice, charter school reimbursement, $65,000. Chapter 70 is really the big number. That's $24 million. And then we have some charges. The last 2 items on that page, or on that group, which is number 11 and 12, they say net of budget. And that is an adjustment that I had to make because in our budget, that is part of the rollover from last year, were enablements, were budget items for those very things. So I've netted the aid to the money that was already in the budget. So that comes up to $26 million. We take the $26 million away from the $52 million. Now we take out that required minimum contribution. That's the number the state expects towns to pay. And that leaves $6,006,000 that's left to be raised. And at this point, this is a mathematics exercise, and if we made a mistake in the numbers or transposed a digit, that's fine, we will correct it. And as I'm going through this, and I realize it's a lot of numbers and it's a lot to take in, give me a call, and we'll be glad to sit down and go over it with you. So there's $6 million left to be raised. Step 3 says not applicable. That's because it's something that doesn't happen here. It really deals with a school district that's a town, not a region. So we have the $6 million. This is line 29 to be raised, and that's going to be split 60-40. That's going to be split just on population, absolutely on population. And that gets added to an assessment. Transportation, it's $1,790,000, but I'm going to take out of that estimated state aid, which comes from the cherry sheet, and I'm going to take out non-mandatory busing, which you can see from the next line down is $500,000. So when I take that out, there's $426,000 to be raised. That's split 60-40, and that is what will show up on line 42 and 43. Now we do non-mandated transportation. It gets split 60-40, and that's just, again, mathematics. It's just a math exercise. We go to step 7. Step 7 is the high school construction assessment, which is debt service. 60-40, that's the way it gets split. Sir?
Question. Whitman has elected.
Frank, come up. Please come up. Thank you.
Frank Wyndham Whitman. Whitman has elected to do additional non-mandated transportation. So if you took the pool of non-mandated transportation, you really can't assign it based on student count. It has to be assigned based on the commitment from the two towns.
It's funny you should mention that, because that was one of the things at the end I was going to talk about. We talked about that in the office. Last year was split roughly 80-20, and I wasn't sure why. I did get the numbers from our transportation director early on about the non-mandated transportation, and so that's probably something that's going to need to be adjusted. Fortunately, we're not going to ask you to vote on this tonight, so we got time to fix it. But thank you for pointing that out. So if we were to go with that, and we will make that adjustment, we're now going to come up with the capital cost. It's 60-40 on the capital cost for the high school. It's 100% for the capital cost, which is debt service, for Hanson. Now we start to add these numbers up, and when we add them up, that's how we get to that assessment. That's how we get to a total assessment for what turns out to be operating costs and transportation for Hanson of $12,104,000, and Whitman $15,274,000, and then we add the capital costs. Now, when the assessment letters go out, they've gone out having split things up 3 ways. They go out with operating costs, non-mandated transportation, and debt service or capital costs. And that's the way we tried to split those assessment costs on the presentation that the superintendent put out. I realize that was a lot of talking, and it's probably reasonably confusing, but I'll try to answer any questions that you might have. The hope was to show you the method that we have, give you a chance to think about it, certainly the finance committees and the town administrators, and then perhaps respond to questions or the school committee.
Members, any questions? Mr. Boyce?
Yeah, John, thank you very much. Do you have like a side note that would kind of detail, you know, what each of the steps are, maybe where they originate from, almost like a set of cliff notes for it or something. I don't know, I mean, a better way to ask that, but, give a little bit more, obviously we start out here,
I can try to put a
pretty
description.
straightforward, but then, like, you can kind of lose it a little bit, just understanding where that number came from on some of the other steps.
I'll see what I can do.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you.
Mike?
Where do I see the breakdown, what each town is going to pay per percentage increase, so budget-wise?
The breakdown, you mean, where does the percentage number come from?
What is the percentage? If it was to stick at that 9%?
So it's not a percentage, it's just a number. So, again, this process, we have to change our mindset into different numbers of percentages. So on the last page on FY '21 assessments, so we used to go from that last page, if we all remember, sometimes there were 15 percentage numbers. The Hanson operating assessment will be $11,903,983 for required, and Whitman is $14,974,512. If we want to add into recommended piece by piece, that will increase a certain number into the Hanson or the Whitman assessment. If we come into decreasing it, I'm going to ask the committee to give me a round number, and we will break it from there. But it's not okay, well, we're going to vote on 8%, and that equals this. Shift away from that set. We're working on whole numbers now and on a percentage increase of the overall budget. One of the things I think, and I questioned this last year, the committee took some heat, I think, from folks, and I believe it was from Bridgewater-Rainham, because the Bridgewater-Rainham budget was voted at 4.5% of an assessment for the communities. Well, that was their overall increase to their budget. Bridgewater-Rainham went up 4%. They used the statutory method. We got a budget of 3.54% of an increase, and for the communities, it was an 8.5% assessment. And folks in town still said, well, you got 8.5% this year. And when we started last year, we're going to look for a 15% assessment. We're looking at whole numbers now as a percentage increase of the entire budget. So as we go, and this isn't the last time we're going to talk about budget, every school committee meeting, we will talk budget. I'm asking to go to both FinComs again to describe and go forward and say, what are you looking for from your communities? Where are you set with required? Where would you like to see as FinCom and Selectmen what you can afford? I think both communities were looking from us to say, where do we want to be in 5 years so we can accurately put together budgets for the towns that are sustainable. Last year at this point, it was very hard for us to give you a sustainable number because of the way we were doing the assessment, so to speak. The per pupil piece was a moving target. So this isn't the be-all, end-all, and as John said, we're not asking you to vote on this. What I think, it's a good opportunity for members of the community, members of the school committee to see the numbers, to have some discussions, to come back the last week of February. We'll talk budget, we'll open it for questions. We will provide all this information on our website, plus some as we put it together and we show the school committee. But as John said, if there's questions about different things, different programs that we can describe, we will absolutely do that. But what I wanted to hammer home tonight too for folks is that required piece is really level service for us. We're not necessarily gaining. We are putting a few things back that we lost last year, but that's to make us more efficient in the district. This year has been challenging with the 19 people cut. We've made some accommodations for that. My hope, maybe we get more than $30 per pupil in revenues from the state. That will help us bring some things back. But I'm asking the committee to hear from their constituents about what they see and recommended and what the folks want too for us to try to infuse in 2021, in 2022, and 2023. I will caution the committee that for a few things on that list, for full day K, I'm not really ready to institute full day K in September. We haven't really talked about that. We haven't prepared rooms for that. I'm also not necessarily prepared to put in a school start time. That would have to be impact bargain with the association. And I'm looking at this year's calendar for school year 20, 2021, and we also gave you a first draft. I have heard from folks, from parents and from teachers alike, they're willing to discuss school start time, but they would want a full calendar year before infusing that in so that they could modify their daycare, knowing that different schools and different mom is dropping off here and so to speak. So those two things, although we're hitting for recommend, I would love to see those implemented. I don't know, and this is a very honest answer, I don't know if we could implement those well for September 21. Some of the other things, we could absolutely put those into our budget for this year and make sure they were fully implemented moving forward in September. But I also want folks to see, these are the needs, and I think Mr. Howard said this at one of our last meetings, we're just scratching the surface of our needs. We've never really given you we did a student success budget a few years ago, I think 2016, we itemized some things. This is something that we have talked with our team about. Sure, I think another piece is going to be some capital items around technology. We're at end of life in some things in this district. The high school is well behind in mobile technology, but we're not putting that into the operating budget. We're going to look at that as capital expenditures for the committee and for the town. We haven't looked at our infrastructure since 2005, when this building was built. Our phone system, our wireless system, our switches, things that are out of my pay grade, my expertise, are at end of life. When I say we're going on Amazon to fix things, we are. We're at end of life for support. We have to make sure that is being fixed to make sure we can run an efficient school system. It's teachers in the classroom and the tools that they have, that they use every day to make sure our kids are getting the best. Again, Mr. Howard, we're scratching the surface with those recommended pieces, infusing them over the next 5 years. I think giving both towns an opportunity to say, how are we going to fund some of these things, either through operational overrides or moving monies around. I know Whitman did a self-study this year with Mr. Madden on their 5-year plan. It was helpful to hear that from him. But I think the communities have asked, what do we need? This is what we need. I would love to put it forth. I also know that we are in a very challenging time as far as the change in assessment. So I'm also a realistic superintendent. My staff is also realistic. We just want to make sure that we have the same people and the same product in front of our kids as we had this year, maybe with a little bit more infusion to make some things a little bit easier.
So I've had, if I could, in answer to your question about the split, this is a weighted average problem. So what it comes down to is $20 million, which is the minimum contribution. $20,444,256 is the minimum contribution. If you do the math, I believe, just doing it here, it turns out that Hanson is 45% of that, 45.62% of that. Whitman is 54.37% of that. So that is the part that is split based upon what the state perceives as your ability to pay. Everything else is split 60-40 based upon population. So everything else is population-based. That is the number that affects the weighted average portion of what we're doing. Make sense? It also means that if you start to cut, for every dollar that you take out of the budget, because this is all after the minimum contribution, every dollar you take out of the budget will reduce Whitman's assessment by 60% and Hanson's assessment by 40%.
That's a shift from last year as well. Last year was a set number for both communities as we move percentage pieces.
Chris? Chris?
Yeah, so a couple things. So one, I think we have to keep pulling on kind of both sides of this. So one, we have to continue to advocate for what the kids need in the district. So yes, like I said that before, I'm going to keep saying that. However, as a point of reference, I think maybe to follow up on Mike's question, and I like what we're doing with the percentages because I think it's confusing. You know, but in terms of hard numbers, what was the assessment to Hanson last year and Whitman last year? Because we have the required proposed assessments here. So what, do you have those numbers?
I was anticipating that question. I just have to get it out for you.
Because I think that's what folks are interested in
Yep.
understanding. What is the shift?
So Hanson's assessment, certified budget last year on 2019 was 52,425,738, with an operating assessment to Hanson of 9,670,975. Whitman operating 14,398,151. Non-mandated busing from Hanson was 102,757 for Hanson, 397,604 for Whitman. Capital was 136,483 for Hanson. Capital High School was 303,184 for Hanson, and capital for Whitman High School was 451,316. That was your certified budget numbers last year.
So the increase in the assessment year over year would be roughly $2.3 million to Hanson and roughly $600,000.
That's correct.
And so I think that's just important to understand, because what the finance committee folks are going to look at and the selectmen are going to look at is how much new money is coming into the town through tax receipts and revenue, and that's the funding mechanism. So
Agreed.
Just to clarify, with Whitman recognizing its state aid, it continues to be a 59. With the recognition of state aid, it's because we're getting more in state aid and we're offsetting, but it is an equal amount if we recognize the state aid coming in, that it is not an unbalanced amount, it's an equal amount.
Dawn?
what you just
I just want to be careful when we talk about the two towns and what they can afford. It also comes down to priorities, too. So be careful not to confuse the two things. What they can afford depends on what choices are made in order to fund and prioritize different things. I agree with long-term planning and these recommended programs, and I think it's something the committee can work towards. I'd love to see a 3 to 5 year rollout of some of these things, certainly. Full-day K, we can't do it this coming fall, and start times and bright programs. At the same time, I think we should have an honest discussion over the consequences of not having full-day K and what that's meant. The state started offering grants for full-day kindergarten in the year 2000, 20 years ago, and they offered it until 2016. So we lost out on grant funding for that. 96% of the kindergartners in Massachusetts go full-day K. There's 4%, that's 63,000 kids, and there's 2,000 kids in Massachusetts who don't go to full-day kindergarten. In our district alone, it's about 60% go full-day K. It's a consequence to more costs. It's costing the district more every year that we don't have something like full-day K. I have a question, if you could just clarify, Jeff, the technology specialist too, you mentioned boots on the ground.
Yep.
It's not a classroom technology, but it's support staff in the district, and it's.
Correct.
It's necessary.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
we have
important.
2 guys running around right now covering the district. And as we go more mobile, and they're great, one of the goals for us this year was be user-friendly for teacher in the building, and they're running around, but we need another person as we evolve technologically. We took a grant, or took a donation of Chromebooks from Conley, $14,000, or was it $14,000? Chromebooks, they were setting them up today. The 2 guys were here, setting them up, they took over our meeting space, and we're setting those up. Those still need to be supported. So that's why we, instead of saying, oh, we need to bring back that tech director piece, leadership role, after long conversations of the department, these are the true needs, and that's it. Technicians and everybody can have their area of expertise. We did bring and shifted last year, transferred a position as a person in technology to support teachers and curriculum base, and that's Ms. Mayette. So that is helping the classroom teachers, so if they have a question about their software or a program or things like that, she helps them as well. And that was just a move from the Whitman School Library to here as a technology specialist as well.
Can I ask you too, on the ELA curriculum program, what actual tools and supplies do we get for that and what grades?
It'll be a full program. It'll be K to 5. It'll be everything from online diagnostics to see where children are at. It'll be everything from teacher resources. It'll be everything from guided reading levels and classroom library sets of high interest for the different levels. It's not like your old school Basil reader that we might have had, which is the anthology of stories. So it's a full component. One of the ones, they've all been vetted, they've all been researched. We have approximately 59 teachers who are piloting it throughout the district at every grade level. That determination will be made probably for late March at our last PD of the year, so that we can move forward pending budgetary approval with a new ELA program, which we have not had since 2002.
Can I ask what they're using now?
Oh, yeah, they're using now,
Like if we don't?
they're using now, they're all teachers, they all have the Massachusetts frameworks, they all work really hard, and they are doing the best they can with what they have. If I were to tell you that some are on teacher pay teachers, if I were to tell you that some are using the Reading Street that was from Scott Forsman in 2002, if I were to tell you that people have to do it themselves. So when we say things like that, teachers get paid too much, when we say things like they get their summers off, while those two things might be what's out there in the community, you have your teachers in this district who are working hard day and night, weekend and night, because we don't provide them as a school district with what they need, research-based in 2019 and 20, in order to teach students effectively, in my mind, as the assistant superintendent.
Absolutely.
I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Bush.
And if I can follow up with the assistant superintendent, I did know Scott Forsman. Not the person, but I was volunteering with Mrs. McGann and quite a few others, trying to make that work for us back in 2002. And so when you talk about something that's already 18 years old, that's a long stretch. That is a really long stretch.
And part of that curriculum line, and we haven't had a curriculum line. We cut that prior to 2010. What we'd like to establish is a curriculum line, so the math program we are paying, they allowed us to pay the full amount over 3 years instead of upfront. It's a 6-year license. This is a 5-year license or 6-year license. It's a 2-year cost. Once we establish that curriculum line, we have to then look at our science curriculum, which we all know we received a science curriculum. We had the Gelfand grant. It was $100 and something thousand of free money that ended 4 years ago, that has maybe outlived what we can afford for science. Then we're going to look at social studies. And then we're looking at middle school and high school. We don't have a curriculum line K to 12. So we would like to build this curriculum line, balancing our licenses over time, so we're not coming to the school committee for a $500,000 increase in curriculum because we're out of date or out of compliance or out of standard. So we started last year with the implementation of elementary math. We're looking at elementary reading. That was the 2 target areas of need and necessity. We will continue to grow that. That doesn't mean that we're going to ask for $200,000 a year in curriculum, but we have to start it somewhere and make sure that we have a pool of money to sustain the curriculum. I concur with George. Teachers are spending a lot of money, their own money, on their curriculum, and to say what's happening in a Conley second grade might be different in a Duval second grade and an Indian Head second grade, and it might differentiate between 4 different teachers. They're teaching to the standard, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily on the same page with the supplies that they have in their classroom.
To tail end before I recognize you, Fred, when you talk about all-day K, I believe when this committee first talked about all-day K implemented, it was $300,000 to $400,000. Now it's $800,000. And part of what we're talking about with curriculum and what teachers do, when you're $3,212 below the state average on per pupil spending, this is what happens. These are the things that happen. You lose programs. You don't have the equal teaching that should be going back and forth. Mr. Small.
Getting on the curriculum for a second, I think that if we could place it perhaps in the agenda for a future meeting, for this committee to discuss whether we want to look at that as a capital item, taking it out of the operating portion of our budget, and being able to have a 5-year plan that's clear and concise of a capital need that just gets pushed away from the operating so we can see what we're doing, because it does meet the criteria of a capital item. It's good for more than 5 years.
Well, I think that's a conversation that we continue on, absolutely.
Chris?
So getting back to the program stuff, in the past, we've talked about special education. I see you have on the recommended the Bright and the licensed social workers. Is this, have you quantified kind of, I guess the conversation in the past has been like return on investment. Can we spend some money today that keeps those out-of-district placements here, saves us money in the end? Is there a way to quantify whether it's this or, because I'm not sure if that's what this is.
So Bright wouldn't be a savings, that would be the program that we have at the high school that we established 5 years ago is really transitional. It helps the student reacclimate to their classroom setting from either, for an example, a kid on a mental health hospitalization for 15 days or a kid who was in a pretty bad car accident and reacclimates to school. It's a transition place. Right now, we don't have that in the middle school, so it's more student service-based. We're not going to bring money back in. Some of the programs that Lauren will present in the future, this year we're moving a middle school program to the high school for some of our special education students that would be transitioning out to an out-of-district placement at no cost. It might be some capital costs because we might have to make a couple adjustments in some classrooms as far as plumbing per se, but it's not going to be an operational cost. It might be a small capital cost. I didn't ask her to go forward with any programs. The language-based program would be next in line at the elementary level.
Which is the language-based program we currently have in year 1 at the Hanson Middle School. That goal has kept children in, and that goal is then now, after year 1, to be able to bring people back
Right.
and/or tuition students. We used to have a language-based program at the Whitman Middle School where we did tuition. At one point, we had 3 tuition students in. This Bright program right now is just to help current students who are in need and who are falling behind and cannot catch back up. So we try to patch them back up and put them back into their academic
So
system.
this is such a big expense that accelerates, so special education in
Sure.
general. Is there anything that you can think of that we could do in terms of, in this budget cycle, that we spend some money now that really helps?
Kind of like what we did last year.
Yeah.
With
Yeah,
that,
elementary language-based program.
we can come up with a
Would be the
cost for
next
that.
one.
And the other piece to that is I look at that special ed PD, training some of our staff, especially paraprofessional staff, to assist teachers with kids that have some behavioral needs might help us there, at a small cost. Because what we're seeing evolving in the elementary especially is behavioral needs for a variety of reasons. Home, trauma, whatever, that's a piece. Our paras aren't trained and some of our teachers aren't trained to de-escalate some of our students. That's where we need. So I see that as a cost of trying to pump that in, which could save us money down the line. But our next programmatic piece, and we can get a cost for the 26, because we've tossed that idea around already, is the elementary-based language program. And our first year, part-time, out-of-district coordinator has already done a very nice job of balancing what we had as $1 million outsource last year in FY19 to bring that back and balance that out a little bit better.
So if there's, I'll defer to the rest of the committee, but if there's things that we can do to
Sure.
create a better experience for the students in the district, right, so they don't have to go somewhere else, and it's something that we
Absolutely
can invest
correct.
in now that's going to save us in the future.
We can absolutely do that. Lauren would be very happy to do that. We've talked about that for a few years already.
Fred?
And a little bit off subject of this, but as far as the amount of information that the committee can expect, will we see something, a line by line?
As I said right at the beginning, John's working at inputting FY21. I'm historically going, did we say FY18?
We'll have next year's proposed budget, this year's budget that we're working on, and then actual expenditures for the last 2 years.
Line by line.
Line by
Line by
line?
line.
Line by line, school
Line by
by
line.
school, broken out the way, similar to our old budget book?
Yes. Yes, very similar to that, but it'll be online, you'll get a copy too. I mean, because this is very different, I didn't want to make a mistake pushing that forward. We haven't inputted all of those line by lines in FY '21 yet. And this is different, and I'm asking people to really think about it in a different way. Percentage-based instead of incremental percentages, whole base percentage bases and whole numbers. And that will help us as that dialogue, as we go through the dialogue.
So just so everybody understands, because there's 3 or 4 conversations going here at once. We're gonna, when we have this line by line, we're gonna have it for 2 previous years and then the current year, so we can compare exactly what it was, what school, whether it's Whitman, whether it's Hanson, the cost.
Yep, it's FY '18, FY '19.
Actual expenditures.
Yeah, actual expenditures. What we're in right now, projected expenditures, and that's gonna have Indian Head instructional supplies, 18, 19, 20, 21. All the way down, like we used to see, or that we said, and then district. So it's by school, by district.
I already want to let you know there will be some confusion because McQuon open at that time, you know what I mean? There's going to be
You're
some
gonna see
movement
zeros.
within that.
And you're gonna see different focuses, and one of the reasons it was different last year is because of the McQuon transition. So Indian Head teachers went up, and Hanson Middle School teachers went up, and Duval teachers went up, and their expenditures went up because we broke McQuon apart.
Right.
We didn't lose any kids, and we didn't lose any teachers, they just went to different places.
Questions? Everyone done? Dawn?
I just wanted to get back to the class sizes.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about your vision of if we were to restore these teachers and which class sizes and teachers are impacted?
Well, we'd have to look at numbers for next year, once we roll over. Right now, I'm looking at Indian Head 4th grade is up, Duval 1st and 2nd grade is up, and we cut a high school chemistry, physics teacher, and offerings aren't as there as they were last year. So those are the critical areas right now, according to our principals. So putting 2 people in Duval, 1 in Indian Head, and 1 at the high school, right now are those 4 that I'm earmarking. That could shift based upon who signs up for what in the high school, if there's a need in a different area of science, and it depends on class sizes at Duval, if people leave, but I don't anticipate that.
Do you know what the kindergarten looks like that would come up to 1st grade, and would something be needed there?
So far it's tracking in kindergarten right now that we should be okay with the numbers we have right now. With the number of staff we have right now for next year.
Okay.
And just so everyone's clear, because this adjusted start times and the full day K, you're not prepared to do it if it was voted for next year? Is that what you're saying?
So for the adjusted start time, I've already had a dialogue with Mr. Kafka. That is part of our contract. The start times are in our contract. Our contract, we will be going into negotiations this summer, early fall. Right now, we would have to impact bargain that in the next 6 months to put that forward. I don't necessarily see that as a piece there. It could happen if the committee voted it. But I also feel you would be pushing a new schedule on our communities, especially if I push Duval back 25 minutes from 9:20 to 8:50 or half an hour, and I do have parents on schedules. So my wife cautioned me about that one. She said, as daycare providers, people doing that, make sure you give people ample time to provide for their work schedules if they have to drop their kids off, especially at the elementary. I'm not as worried about high school kids and their schedules. They can take a bus to school. I'm worried about moms and dads leaving their 2nd grader home because their work schedule adjusted or something like that. So I'd like to vet that a little bit more. As far as full day K, yes, we could do that.
If you vote it, we're
I think we rush to make sure our classes are there. We'd have to do some modifications. I might have to remove North River Collaborative from Duval, and do some things. If I got it, yes, we'd scramble to do it, but we haven't talked about it being real, so to speak, from the fall on. And it's a lofty expense, and we will not be getting anything back in Chapter 70 for those pupils. That's a misnomer that we've talked about before, because we are in the 4 million plus of hold harmless. Until we hit to that state aid that the state says we're giving what we're supposed to, then we'll start counting those students in Chapter 70. So that expenditure would be an operational expense that would be ongoing.
Gotcha.
The reason I asked this, Jeff, the committee, everyone that's here is taking in a lot of numbers. You've got a lot of information in front of you. We've got to determine where to go with this, so I just want to try to make it a little bit more specific for the committee so they can make these decisions, because at some point down the road, we're going to have to vote on this.
Sure.
As I said, we're not voting on this tonight.
full day K is-
So I'm not suggesting that, I'm just going back to what you
Right.
said.
And again, and what George just said, full day K is in the best interest of kids. That's a priority for us. We are, Mr. Howard, we are losing revenue. We are losing money to other districts right now because we don't offer that. Okay? So that's an area right then and there that we could probably make our kids better and recover financially over time. That will also make us more amenable to our kids that not only go to choice, but to charter. That will make us more competitive with those schools.
It's also an equity to students. It's an equity to youth. It's that we start on a non-level playing field as our students begin their educational journey. And that non-level playing field widens sometimes, a lot of times, as a result of that.
We also have
Now-
to take into consideration, cost goes up every year, so as we keep kicking it down the road.
Right.
It's gonna be more and more expensive and out of reach to do.
True.
One second, Fred. Can we also get a number of, and I know this is difficult because if you don't see the student at the very beginning for all-day K, a number on how many students don't go to this district, whether it's they go to outside schools, they go to private schools, pay for charter, a number broken down for both towns. I know that was asked of me a few years ago, and I got it. But we're losing kids because we don't have all-day K. And once you lose them, you usually lose them for the duration.
And I will say, we've seen an uptick in kids going to Voc Tech because we're not putting forth the robotics, the engineering, the technology programs that we should, because we've remained level. And not saying that they wouldn't go there necessarily, but we are losing a portion of students that would probably come here, but we're not offering some of the flavors that they want to see for their post-high school career.
Mr. Small?
On the full-day K, I think if we just, by waiting, within the next couple of years, it's gonna be a mandate anyways.
Sure.
It's coming from the state, so, whether we say we're gonna do it, or it's gonna be forced upon us, then the next thing they'll be looking at actually will be pre-K.
Sure. And that's already out there.
Yeah.
It's already out there.
Dawn?
Just
Mr.
add on
Kane's
to
waiting
what you said,
patiently.
we may not get anything back in aid with full-day K, but one of the other costs is that a half-day student, the teacher's not able to address any needs they have, speech and so forth, language, the day is so short. So now they're on to first grade, and then they're going to cost the district with additional support needed right then and there that wasn't addressed a year earlier, or even a few years more delayed. So that's a cost by not providing it.
Sean?
Thank you. Sean Kane, 31 Forest Street, Whitman. Question, I couldn't quite hear the number. For the increase in Hanson's assessment on the required budget is how much from last year to this year, or proposed? From this year to next year proposed?
2.3.
Approximately 2.3. So assuming they're going to have to put some sort of override on the ballot. So an override presumably above $1 million, maybe close to $2 million. Is that accurate or not? I don't know. I'm sure you couldn't come up with an exact number, but they couldn't absorb that. What would happen if the override on the Hanson side was not supported by the people at the ballot? How would that play out with the budget? I guess it'd be helpful to have some information that way. So if on the required budget that you propose, so like a level service budget, it's going to go to an override in Hanson. There's some confusion about what's going on with the assessment. There's some bad blood. It's a relatively big override, right? Likely bigger than $1 million. And what happens if the people of Hanson say we're not going to support that? What happens to the overall budget? Where does it fall? does that look like?
We have to come back and recalculate the whole budget. Or stand pat and have another vote and go back at it again.
Super town meeting?
So-
Yes, it could end up at a super town meeting.
So
That's correct.
that process, if and when the school committee votes a budget to both member communities, if one community accepts that budget and passes it at town meeting, and the other one doesn't, that budget comes back to this school committee to
And we redo it.
reapportion that. Then it would go back to the communities to vote it. If it comes back to the school committee to reapportion it, and then it would go to super town meeting. So that override question is something that I can't answer, it's just the process here. So it could come to a super town meeting, yes, correct, with a number that the school committee puts forth for the super town meeting.
A budget like that would have to get 2/3 vote of this committee?
Any budget coming out right now needs 7 members.
Okay, and if it doesn't have 7 members, what does that look like?
We don't have a budget. That's what I've got from my attorney working right now. We don't have a budget. And I also have Christine Lynch from DESI asking DESI lawyers, if a budget doesn't come out of school committee, where does it go? So I do not have an answer for you right now. The best I have from MASC, Jim Hardy, is if a budget isn't approved by school committee at 2/3, you don't have a budget. I hope to have more information February 26th.
It's a rare event, that's what we were told, and they're researching it, for a budget not to come out of a school committee.
They've had budgets not passed by town, but they haven't, our attorney and DESI has not, it's not a common occurrence, so they have to check with legal on both sides. So I've got 2 different sets of attorneys looking at that 2/3 piece, and what happens if a school committee doesn't approve a budget, where does it go?
Okay.
That's the best answer I can give right now. And Christine, we've been in contact, and she said she would contact legal in DESI, and I'm waiting to hear. And I'll report back to the committee as we go from there. About the process. Today was about presenting the numbers and the assessment numbers and having people understand what we're asking for. And I think now we have them, and as both communities have been talking and working together, I'm hoping that continues, now that you have real numbers. Numbers have been floating around since November. These are the actual numbers, according to Mr. Tuffy, and now those are whole numbers that people can start to talk about.
I appreciate that, and I think the bottom line is you ultimately have to sell the budget to the people who are going to support it. So keep that in mind.
Thanks.
Anyone else? I'd entertain a motion to come out of a public budget hearing.
So moved?
Second.
Roll call?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. That concludes the superintendent's report also, am I correct? You don't have anything to add?
No, I do not.
I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
All those in favor?
Thank you, John. Well done.
Great job.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So cool. Really just
I'm going to be a great uncle for a second time.